Thank you all for having me. Just a quick note here as I go. I just like Brian mentioned, I am bandwidth challenged in a lot of cases, and so you'll see I'll keep my video off for the most part. But I do have a pretty little screenshot here of my mug and what I do. And here at Microsoft, I have focused for the last couple of years on virtual desktop platform on Azure. And but really my background is in infrastructure in general in the data center, applications, virtual desktops, servers, infrastructure, things like that. I spent a long time hands-on, and then at various places like VMware, Dell EMC, and now Microsoft for the last couple of years. So if you have questions or you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at my LinkedIn contact there, in which case you can send me a direct message and I'll get back to you. All right, so let's jump into WVD and Windows Virtual Desktop VDI on Azure. But first, I like to step back and I like to kind of talk about things like Brian did. Why do we even care about running virtual desktop in a public cloud or in a public setting? How do we get out of the data center? You know, my focus has really been on Azure and running things, and it's a change in the way we do things. But virtual desktop on Azure really came about, and Microsoft started thinking about this a few years ago. And we've been doing RDS and working with Citrix for a long time, but we started to think about how do we enable folks and how do we enable remote workforces when we start to get to the cloud or when they start putting their applications on public cloud like Microsoft or AWS or GCP. How do we enable the users to get access and to be close to that data when not necessarily that data or that application is sitting in the data center? Well, COVID changed everything. You know, we thought we knew what we were doing with that, but COVID only accelerated that. It only accelerated what we thought about needing to get users closer to the end user. And I am sure everybody on this call, Brian mentioned it, knows that when you go from working in the office happily, everybody's working and you can get access to your applications and data, to the next day, no, you have to work at home. It makes it a challenge to how do we get those users close to that data and applications. But I don't think COVID is going to be the only thing that affects this. Other events like hurricanes or natural disasters, or one of my colleagues likes to say murder hornets and killer bees, these things are going to continue in our world. And it's only going to make work from home and work from a virtual desktop more and more important. Now, the challenge with that is how do we scale? How do we become agile and flexible in that new normal? And really, we see that during the COVID and the amount of time that I spent working with customers, I don't think I slept from about February to about June, mainly because we had to enable these things fast. And so the new normal is that flexibility and the agility of the business to be able to spin these out quickly and fast. But I don't necessarily think it's only in the times of a disaster or a pandemic or anything like that. Gartner actually says, Gartner put out an article back in June that the biggest case for desktop virtualization really going to be BCDR. And I agree with that, but I also don't agree with that because I think this is changing the way we as business, and even Microsoft has thought about how do we enable these folks. And so I think that as we go into this new normal, we're going to be positioned very well to help customers enable their end users. Now, I'll go into this. I was an on-premises guy for a long time. I tried to do a lot of this stuff on premises, and then I get really passionate about now we've got a platform in Azure, whether in any public cloud, really to go after these virtual desktops and enable fast, agile performance for your business. Now, on premises, these are some of the areas where I struggled. You know, how do we get those things deployed in a model where I have to go out and buy hardware, or in a model where, like Brian mentioned, how do we scale like the VPN concentrators, or how do we scale our WAN so that we can handle that influx of users? It's really difficult to be able to do that. So Microsoft's been thinking about this for a long time. We've been thinking about how do we enable this in Azure and give our users the ability to get those things together. So let's talk a little bit about what we have in Azure today. And I'll uh, take a look at the Windows 10 experience. So Windows 10 on laptops and desktops is a really great experience for users. And for a while, virtual desktop platforms in the server environment or in a public cloud have really been on a server-based OS and not on that Windows 10 experience. I'll come back to this slide in just a second, but we've really kind of had these two options. We've had this desktop experience in server, we've had this desktop experience in Windows 10 Enterprise. What we've tried to enable, and Brian mentioned in his talk just a second ago, was really we wanted to enable the user to have the most common experience that they're used to. We want to give them the best possible experience when they log in, the best possible experience when they're using it, and then the most consistent interface with what they'd be used to on their on-premises network. Now that's easy to do if you just spin out a whole bunch of Windows 10 Enterprise VMs. Now the challenge with that though is it always doesn't take advantage of the cost benefits of a multi-session that you can maybe get with a server. So what we've done is we have enabled a Windows 10 multi-session environment, and that gets many users to one virtual desktop. It cuts back on the cost that it takes to run that, but it also enables that user experience. And we've updated the Windows 10 Enterprise to allow for that multi-user experience, but also to handle applications that run and the performance that those applications generally would get in a server environment. We now can do in a Windows 10. Now, if I go back to this list, some of the other things that you get, now this is virtual desktop on Azure, so flexibility in our environment to virtualize both those desktops and an application. So we don't necessarily, you don't necessarily need to give users always a full desktop experience. Maybe they just need application access, or maybe they're a call center that just needs to get to that call center application, but doesn't necessarily need a full desktop. We can do both of those. Because we run on Azure and we integrate with Microsoft 365 services, you get to take advantage of the security and the management features of Azure and O365 and M365 to make sure that we have the security in the session, but also security to your documents, to getting access to that data. Okay. Now, when we look at Azure and we try to look at how we deploy this as part of the greater Azure ecosystem. So now we've got simplified management, consistent tools across your data center in Azure, image management, monitoring, logging, even the portal and how we access those things. So that comes with being able to deploy onto Azure. Because we're public cloud, we get worldwide elasticity. During COVID, we saw a lot of our customers needing to deploy in multiple regions. And in general, they would have had to buy hardware and get them out to those regions, get somebody to set that up, or rack and stack it, or go to a colo type facility to do that. In Azure, we can simply spin up resources in those regions. Now, when everybody and their brother is spinning up those resources, there's contention, but we're able to expand and flex with the need here at Azure. And so we saw people deploying around the world. I had one customer deployed in 10 regions around the world to be able to get their users online. Now, when we talk about reducing costs and time spent on on-premises infrastructure, this really has to go along with, or this really goes along with, how do we get those users in a multi-session environment so we can pull down that cost? But it's also about the OpEx versus CapEx. We're not buying hardware ahead of time, so we're spending a little bit less. We're only spending what we need when we need it. We're only spending what we consume. And so that's a big advantage I think we have here at Azure, and being able to run virtual desktops on that. Now, some of the use cases that we've seen out in the field, and this is a lot of this is not a perfect list. This is a lot of what we're seeing folks use virtual desktop for. And really, it's a lot of work from home, of course, because of COVID, but also for maybe offshore workers, developers who are maybe not in the US based, or maybe they need to enable users that are across the world. So we see a lot of these um, these use cases come up a lot. One of the things we get questions a lot is, can I run like CAD applications or high graphics use cases? I even had a gaming company come to me and say, hey, we want to use GPU because our gamers need to test and be as part of the development process. And we have GPU enabled machines that we can get users access to those things remotely and give them the performance they need without having to ship them a whole bunch of high-end hardware. And so this really gives us the ability to flex and grow with the type of business use cases that we need to enable. Um, so we do have different solutions for healthcare, for government, financial services. One of the things I'll talk about in a few minutes is data sovereignty. Where is that data located? Where is your virtual desktop located? How important is that to your security posture when you look at where your users have to connect from? And where do we need to land that? Some of our governments around the world will say that all of the data for our applications or even the desktop itself has to reside in the same country or has to be in the same country that the business is located. And so we spend a lot of time talking with security teams. How do we enable that? How do we get users quick and fast access to that environment? Now in Microsoft, this is really unique to Microsoft. When we talk about licensing, and I promise I won't go too far into this, but when we talk about licensing, Windows Virtual Desktop, or excuse me, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session only runs in Azure. It doesn't run on premises or other public clouds. And we've enabled a new licensing model to be able to take advantage of that. If you have any one of these Microsoft E3.5, Windows 10 E3.5, you're able to take advantage of this licensing model where you don't have to buy additional licenses for your users. And so this is a really cool thing that our teams came up with in the background, because a lot of our customers already have the Microsoft 365 E3 and E5. So that you're not upgrading, you're not changing your licensing model. If you still need to use your server model because you've invested in that, you can absolutely run that on the platform. It does still require the server OS and a RDS Cal. But outside of the licensing model, you're just paying for what you use. Storage, networking, logs, things like that as part of that. Now, we recognize Microsoft, our service, the Windows Virtual Desktop service, we launched that about a year ago now. And we recognize that it's a year-old product. It's a 2 or 3.0 product, and there are other things out in the field. So what we've done, and we really have three flavors of virtual desktop on Azure. So Windows Virtual Desktop Native, which is the Microsoft PaaS layer and connection layer and management pieces. And then Citrix and VMware, we have really strong partnerships with both of them to be able to take those tools and those platforms and run them in a customer subscription or a customer's environment so that they are isolated and managed by those. Any one of those three can take advantage of the Windows 10 multi-user environment or the server environment to run in Azure. Because all of that runs on Azure, they also get to take advantage of that M365 licenses. And the security benefits, all of the scalability and the things that Azure brings to the table, those platforms get to take advantage of. Now, if we drill one step further, just a little bit further into the actual platform itself, and we'll talk among all three of these here, is really Microsoft that I don't know why I say compute at the bottom twice, but compute, storage, networking, hypervisor is all managed by Microsoft. That's the physical layer and the hypervisor layer. Now, if we move up the stack, what Microsoft introduced about a year ago was the Windows Virtual Desktop PaaS layer, and that's where the users connect into. That's where they get access and can see what desktops or applications they have access to. That's the web app access layer. And then the broker and the gateway service is what we use to connect the end user's clients. So that's a remote desktop client, that's a HTML5 browser client. How do we get that access into these desktops that live inside of your subscription? And then how do we secure these things? And if we look at the way this works, is we have hosts down here on the right that live in your subscription or in your environment. These are protected by your security agents, your network, your security posture. And then we load agents on those, just like the VDA agent for Citrix. We have two agents. We've got one agent, the RD agent, that talks out to the broker, and the broker is what controls the session as part of the connection process. And then the gateway is like a relay system. And so what we're doing is we're relaying commands from the agents down to the hosts, and the gateway is doing all that translation. If you can imagine, I am standing in the middle of two people and they need to communicate, but they can't. So the person on my left hands me a note, I hand it to the person on my right. Their response, they run a note, hand it back to me, I hand it to the person on my left. That's what the gateway service is doing. Now, these agents communicate on port 443 out to the gateway and the broker service. This is a URL access. This is a 443 outbound only. We don't connect directly from the internet. We don't expose port 3389 or RDP traffic directly to the internet. And that's our reverse connect implementation to securing these desktops and making sure that you are not having to put them in a DMZ or put them in an environment where you have to VPN into or whatever. The WVD service handles that front end security piece of this. And of course, we integrate with Azure Active Directory and Windows domain controllers to make sure that your users get the security, multi-factor, conditional access, things like that, to get your users access into the system. And then once you are on the system and you need to use those things, we actually have ExpressRouter VPN able to get onto your on-premises network if you need that access. Now, we've got gateways and connection points scattered throughout our region. So we're regional-based service. When the user comes into the service, we connect them to their closest local gateway, and this goes to help us with that last mile. So once the user gets into their ISP, they come into Azure, their gateway, and then all that traffic is funneled to the virtual desktop that lives in any Azure region across the world, and all that traffic is done over the Azure backbone. So we get to cheat a little bit in terms of performance and speed, and with the Azure backbone and all the things that we have with Azure and connecting those up. Now, virtual desktop WVD native, we don't always have the perfect tool set today, and I'm not going to lie. There are things that we are improving and we are getting better every day, but we have a bunch of partners that help aid and augment and enhance what we can do on the platform itself. Specifically, NetApp, and this is the AVS solution, Nerdio are both tools that can help you operationalize and enhance what we're doing with Windows Virtual Desktop. But we also have partners like iGel. You're going to hear Mike talk in a little bit about iGel. They were the first hardware platform for Windows Virtual Desktop, one of our most trusted hardware platforms to be able to get the end users a simple device that's managed that can connect into the virtual desktop platform. Then we also have, Lakeside and Liquidware ControlUp to do assessments and make sure that the environment, Brian talked about this, make sure the environment is sized and can work the way they need to. And then other things like Sapago and ThinPrint, these things can help us do monitoring and management, the day two operations type pieces. Now, if we look at the Citrix and VMware solutions, we really take that Microsoft PaaS layer that I talked about, the part where we connect into and we give those things out, and we replace this with Citrix, which is the management component of it. This is the SaaS-based management piece hosted by Citrix on Azure. And then we have other pieces if in the subscription, the workspace, the directors, the gateways, all of those are IaaS components that live in your environment that get you access or get your users access to their virtual desktops. But these virtual desktops, in a very similar manner, get deployed in your subscription and access your environment. VMware is no different, where we have the Horizon control plane. We've got the unified access gateways that run in your subscription and get you access to the things that you need access to. Now, the biggest thing here to take is we're really in this together. This is Microsoft's partner with VMware and Citrix and WVD native, where sometimes it actually makes sense to continue doing what you're doing. We hear all the time, "Hey, I want to move off the Citrix platform, or I want to move off the VMware platform," but that's not always the best choice. It's not always the best choice operationally, but it's also not always the best choice for you to change how your users access, because that can cause a lot of disruption. So really, with Microsoft's approach, is we want to enable the features of quick and agile deployments, but we also want to make sure that day two you can still run the thing. So we spend a lot of time talking with our customers on which is going to be the best solution based on the feature functionality, based on the business need that you need. For me, it's never about I'm just trying to sell a solution. It's always about how are we enabling the business to do what they need to do. Now we've got some ancillary technologies like FS Logics. If I go to this, where we bought a couple of years ago, this is how we do profile management. This is ability to attach a profile to a running desktop very quickly, very seamlessly, and giving the user that experience. We also do some app masking and Java redirection with FS Logics. A lot of people ask us along the way, how do we optimize things? This is a very big topic of conversation, and Daryl's probably going to talk about this more here. But teams, how do we enable teams to be optimized? Because running Teams or running WebEx or running Zoom in a virtual desktop environment, whether it's Citrix, VMware, or WVD native, is it's always processing that. It's always processing the video and the audio on the local desktop. How do we offload that to the physical device that you're connecting to give that user a better experience? And so we've done some optimizations with Teams. We've made this WebRTC hooks to be able to offload that data. We're working with other vendors like WebEx and Zoom to be able to do that on the WVD platform. And Citrix and VMware already have a lot of these connectors built in to be able to enable this so that you can get a better experience for your end user. I'll go really quickly through this. How do we get started? You really just need to have a presence in Azure, identity in Azure, and then we start talking about how we're going to deploy a profile management and which platform we're going to run on. So Citrix, VMware, and Azure. Now with that, let me keep going one or two more slides, and then we'll be done here. So common questions that we get: can we bring our own image? Yes, absolutely. Will my security tooling work? Yes, you can use your same security tools. That's the beauty of running things on Azure in Citrix, VMware, or WVD native. You get to use your existing tooling. You can bring that to that. Can I create custom images? Absolutely. It's not, we're not saying, hey, just use the Microsoft images. You can absolutely customize those, modify them, change however you need to do this. Will we support AAD join? So this is where customers need to be fully committed to the cloud. They don't want any on-premises resources. You'll see that come out from us probably later this year, early next year. For the WVD platform, Citrix and VMware also have the ability to do that. And if we have high latency or slow internet connection, that's where I talked about that last mile connection into Azure, and then we take advantage of the Azure backbone to really kind of enhance that. So that's one area where we get to cheat a little bit, I guess, with how we do that. But really, the slow and internet connections, we rely on things like the ICA client from Citrix to do a lot of the bandwidth optimization for that. And then one of the other things we get from a lot of questions is security. Can we destroy a VM at logoff? Can we do that in this environment so that we can give our users a new fresh VM at the time? Citrix can absolutely do that. VMware can do that on our platform, and so this is part of the way we talk to customers, and we try to help them decide what makes sense on what platform and what platform is going to be the best for them. And then my last slide here is as part of the Azure ecosystem. This is all three of these are really part of the broader spectrum of what Azure provides, right? The security, the governance and policy management for my users and for my systems, for my VMs, for my networks, being able to protect and back up these resources, but more importantly, being able to scale and flex with what the business needs at the time the business needs it, without having to say, okay, give me 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it's going to take me to get my hardware to expand my environment. I can simply go out and burst that workload up into Azure. And then, of course, we've got our monitoring solutions where we can make sure we understand what's happening in that environment and what's happening around that VM to get the users the most up-to-date thing. You'll see on the side there some of the things I call about that the experience. Brian said it, I'll say it again, experience, experience, experience. It is probably one of the most important things for your customers and your users to be able to get them the right experience when they need it that performs as well or better than what they were doing on their physical desktop. And we aim to do that with the virtual desktop platform. All right, Ron, I think I am at the end of my time here, and I think the end of my slides, actually. There are additional resources here in the PDF that you'll get.